Imagine spending 16 years behind bars waiting to die for a crime you never committed. Now imagine that crime was the murder of your own child. This is the haunting reality of Melissa Lucio's story. A mother who found herself on death row in Texas after the tragic death of her 2-year-old daughter. What would you do if the system meant to protect justice became the very thing that threatened to take your life? How would you hold on to hope when everyone believed you were a monster? These are questions Melissa has lived with every day since 2007. But sometimes truth has a way of fighting its way to the surface, even after years of being buried. Today, we're diving into a case that challenges everything we think we know about justice, maternal love, and the devastating consequences of rushing to judgment. A case that proves sometimes the most terrifying crimes aren't the ones that make headlines, but the ones committed in the name of justice itself. On the evening of February 17, 2007, in Harlingen, Texas, a frantic 911 call echoed through the emergency dispatch center. 2-year-old Mariah Alvarez, the youngest of Melissa Lucio's 12 children, wasn't breathing. What began as a normal day in a struggling family's life would spiral into a nightmare that would last for decades. Mariah had been found unresponsive in her bed, covered in bruises. To the responding paramedics and law enforcement, the signs pointed to abuse. But what they didn't know then was that 2 days earlier, Mariah had fallen down a steep flight of stairs at the family's new apartment building. Have you ever witnessed how quickly assumptions can take hold, how rapidly a grieving mother can become a suspect? The family had just moved into their new home, boxes still unpacked, dreams of a fresh start still hanging in the air. They were poor, yes, and life wasn't perfect, but Melissa's children would later testify about their mother's gentle nature, her dedication to keeping her family together despite their struggles. But none of that seemed to matter to the investigators who arrived at the scene. Within hours of Mariah's death, before the family could even begin to process their loss, Melissa found herself in an interrogation room. The investigators had already made up their minds. This wasn't an accident, this was murder. But would they have jumped to the same conclusion if this had happened in an affluent neighborhood? If Melissa wasn't a poor Hispanic mother of 12? Picture this: a grieving mother, exhausted and in shock, trapped in a small interrogation room for over 7 hours. Have you ever wondered how someone could maintain their innocence for hours, only to finally give in to what their interrogators wanted to hear? This is exactly what happened to Melissa Lucio that fateful night. From midnight until dawn, armed Texas Rangers fired question after question at Melissa. They ignored her consistent denials of harming Mariah. Instead, they showed her photographs of her deceased daughter, badgering her with accusations, telling her they wouldn't leave until she told the truth. How many of us could withstand such psychological pressure? The interrogation tactics used that night would later be scrutinized by experts. Melissa, a survivor of lifetime abuse, repeatedly told them about the stairs, about the accident, about how Mariah had seemed okay at first. But the investigators weren't interested in this explanation. They had their story, and they were determined to make it stick. Finally, after hours of relentless questioning, sleep-deprived and emotionally broken, Melissa uttered the words they wanted to hear. "I guess I did it. I'm responsible." But notice what she didn't say. She never actually confessed to killing Mariah. She never described how she supposedly caused her daughter's injuries. In fact, her words were more an exhausted surrender than a confession. Think about it. If you were guilty of such a horrible crime, would you spend 7 hours maintaining your innocence? Would you repeatedly explain a different, legitimate scenario that could have caused your child's injuries? Or would you, like so many guilty people do, simply confess right away to get it over with? The interrogation video would later become crucial evidence, but not in the way the prosecution intended. It would show a system more interested in securing a confession than finding the truth. A mother worn down by grief and pressure, and a tragic miscarriage of justice in the making. As we delve into Melissa Lucio's trial, the failures of justice become even more apparent. What happens when crucial evidence that could prove someone's innocence never makes it to the courtroom? This is exactly what occurred during Melissa's trial, and the consequences were devastating. The prosecution built their case on shaky ground, withholding vital evidence that could have changed everything. Medical records, witness statements, and expert opinions suggesting Mariah's death could have been accidental were kept from the jury. Can you imagine making a life or death decision without all the facts? Perhaps most troubling was the prosecution's reliance on a so-called expert who claimed he could determine Melissa's guilt simply by watching her behavior. This witness told the jury he could tell Melissa was lying based on her demeanor during testimony. Science has since completely debunked this type of testimony, but at the time, it carried significant weight with the jury. What the jury also never knew was Melissa's history as a survivor of severe physical and sexual abuse. This background wasn't just personal history. It was crucial context that experts now say makes someone far more likely to give a false confession under pressure. How might the jury have viewed that late-night interrogation differently if they'd known about her past trauma? Critical evidence about the accident on the stairs was never fully explored. The defense wasn't given access to expert witnesses who could have explained how Mariah's injuries were consistent with an accidental fall. Instead, the prosecution painted a picture of deliberate abuse, while suppressing evidence that pointed to a tragic accident. The jury, operating without complete information, reached the only conclusion they could with the distorted version of events presented to them. They found Melissa guilty and sentenced her to death. But as we now know, this verdict was built on a foundation of withheld evidence, junk science, and crucial omissions. Would you trust a conviction secured under these circumstances? In a groundbreaking development that shook the Texas justice system, Judge Arturo C. Nelson's recent ruling has declared what Melissa's supporters have been saying for years: she is actually innocent. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to finally be vindicated after 16 years of wrongful imprisonment? The judge's findings were unequivocal and extraordinary. He concluded that there is clear and convincing evidence that no rational juror could convict Melissa of capital murder or any lesser charge. Think about the weight of those words, no rational juror. Not with reasonable doubt, but with absolute certainty. What makes this ruling even more compelling is the evidence that has finally come to light. Medical experts have now confirmed that Mariah's injuries were entirely consistent with an accidental fall down the stairs. The very explanation Melissa gave from the beginning, the bruising patterns, the timing of the injuries, the medical evidence, it all points to a tragic accident rather than intentional harm. Remember those stairs in Melissa's apartment building? They were steep, worn, and dangerous. Other residents had reported accidents on them before. Why wasn't this information considered crucial during the initial investigation? How many other pieces of evidence were overlooked in the rush to judgment? The judge's ruling also highlighted something profound about the nature of grief and trauma. Melissa's reaction to her daughter's death, which prosecutors used to paint her as guilty, was actually a natural response to devastating loss. Experts now explain that there's no right way to grieve, and that trauma responses can often be misinterpreted by those who don't understand them. Even more disturbing is the realization that evidence supporting Melissa's innocence existed all along. It was there, buried in medical reports, witness statements, and expert analyses. Yet it took 16 years of a mother's life, for this truth to finally be acknowledged by the courts. How many other cases might be hiding similar miscarriages of justice? Melissa Lucio's case stands as a stark reminder of the irreversible nature of capital punishment and its potentially devastating consequences. With at least 200 death row inmates exonerated since 1973, including 18 in Texas alone, how many others might be sitting in cells right now, waiting for justice to finally recognize their innocence? As Melissa awaits the final decision from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, her family holds on to hope. Her sons John and Bobby, along with their entire family, dream of welcoming their mother home after 16 long years of separation. Can you imagine the bittersweet nature of their wait? So close to justice, yet still held in suspense. The implications of this case reach far beyond Melissa's personal story. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our criminal justice system. How many other cases have been built on misinterpreted evidence, rushed judgments, or incomplete investigations? What safeguards do we need to prevent more families from enduring such ordeals? Currently, Melissa remains one of just 7 women on Texas's death row, among 174 total inmates. While no execution date has been set since the appeals court ordered a review, the waiting game continues. There's no mandated timeline for the Court of Criminal Appeals to make their final decision, leaving Melissa and her family in a state of hopeful anticipation. This case has become a rallying cry for death penalty opponents and justice reform advocates alike. It demonstrates how initial assumptions, once set in motion, can steamroll through a person's life. leaving devastation in their wake. Yet it also shows that persistence and truth can eventually prevail, even after 16 years of darkness. As we reflect on Melissa Lucio's story, we must ask ourselves, how many other innocent people are fighting similar battles in our justice system right now? The road to proving innocence is often long and painful, but cases like this remind us why we must never stop questioning, investigating, and seeking the truth. What would you do if someone you loved was wrongly accused? How would you maintain hope through 16 years of separation and uncertainty? These are questions that thousands of families across America face every day. The details of this case, from the flawed interrogation to the withheld evidence, serve as a powerful reminder that justice requires vigilance, thoroughness, and unwavering dedication to the truth. To explore more cases like Melissa's and understand the complex factors that contribute to wrongful convictions, visit therealcrimediary.com. Join us next time as we delve into another case that challenges our assumptions about justice and truth. Until then, keep questioning, keep seeking answers, and remember, sometimes the most shocking truth is that there was no crime at all. Hey listeners, welcome back to The Real Crime Diary. I'm your host, Sean Dupree. If you tuned in last time, we had a deep dive into the disturbing history of power abuse across different eras, looking at the connection between dominance, control, and how it plays out even today. We touched on scandals from the past and compared them with some modern-day examples, showing how these patterns of abuse, unfortunately, persist. One of the most insightful tools we've explored to understand this is my book, Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's not just a historical account, but an interdisciplinary approach to understanding why this keeps happening. We draw from history, philosophy, and modern case studies to explain how figures like Dominique Pellico, Harvey Weinstein, and others have exploited their positions of power for their own gain, often protected by the very systems meant to stop them. Recap of last interaction. In our last live stream, we discussed how libertinism, philosophically introduced by figures like Marquis de Sade, has shaped the way power and pleasure have been entangled throughout history. This concept ties directly into how figures like Weinstein operated, as we saw parallels between de Sade's fictional characters and the way powerful men manipulated their victims in real life. You guys had some amazing comments, asking how societal structures have allowed these behaviors to go unchecked for so long. It's a crucial question, and one that the book addresses deeply. Why this book is valuable. Now, what's powerful about Power, Pleasure, and Pain is its ability to break down these historical patterns and link them to the present. You're not just reading about ancient Rome or Enlightenment philosophy, you're seeing how these ideologies are alive today. The book uncovers how sexual violence and control have been systematically woven into the fabric of societies from ancient times right up to the modern era. It's about understanding not just the individual predators, but the systems that protect them, whether it's in royal courts, religious institutions, or today's corporate and entertainment worlds. Through these historical lenses, we also explore movements like #MeToo that are beginning to dismantle these structures. The fight for justice is far from over, but as the book demonstrates, we are in the midst of a cultural shift where legal reforms are finally addressing these long-standing issues. It's more than a history lesson. It's a guide to understanding and supporting change today. What's next? If you want to dive deeper, I suggest picking up Power, Pleasure, and Pain, a study of abuse through time. It's available now, and trust me, it will change the way you think about power, pleasure, and control. We've even got some exclusive content coming up on the channel where we'll be exploring the book's case studies in even more detail, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to The Real Crime Diary so you don't miss any updates. Let's keep this conversation going, because understanding the past is key to changing the future.